last 7 or 8 years that we've been growing at about 7%.
The growth is fine, I don't think they're arguing, but is it a terrible failure that you haven't attacked poverty?
Growth itself doesn't automatically lead to an improvement.
Democracy also means that in order to get results, it's an opportunity in order to get results. Why corruption is such a big issue? You have to fight for it.
Hello and welcome to this really very special show. We are here at the beautiful St. Stephen's College with Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen and somebody who's going to get the Nobel Prize, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. And many young Nobel Prize aspirants in front of me from Delhi School of Economics. How many of you? Raise your hands. Yes. You see, your IQ adds up to more than all the rest. Sri Ram College of Commerce. Now these are the ones with 100% cutoff. We only took those. You know, like you used to get. And St. Stephen's College. Yes. Okay, the brightest and the best. And we're going to get you to ask questions, tough questions. Ready for tough questions from these youngsters?
Yes.
But let me start by kind of paraphrasing something, Professor Sen, that you've written recently. And what I'm going to say is not an exact quote. I've got the exact quote, but I'll paraphrase it, where you said, along with your co-author, Jean Drèze, that never has a country in the history of the world had such a high growth rate for so long without really doing much for the poor, or with such an extreme disparity, or with such little impact on including the poor in that growth. Is that
with little impact is right.
Little impact on the poor.
Yeah.
But is that an exaggeration?
Of course it's an exaggeration. But the point of making a sharp statement is to draw people's attention to that issue. Though it is an exaggeration, it's a mild exaggeration. I mean, there have been impact, obviously, in terms of, despite the inequality of income being somewhat higher than before, I think certainly a lot more people have, in any measure of poverty line, has a higher level of income and smaller number of people proportionately. But in terms of the kind of thing that my colleague Jean Drèze and I were looking at, in terms of reduction of the neglect of healthcare, neglect of education, neglect of social security, I think the gaps are enormous. And really, the fact that, just to take one indicator, that in terms of one of the standard measures of undernourishment, India has the highest ratio absolutely in the world of undernourished children.
Montek, during this period of highest growth rate and no impact on the poor, you've been in power for a lot, or responsible for a lot of it. So do you accept that as a really very sharp criticism of the government's performance?
Well, let me say, first of all, Amartya didn't say no impact.
Yeah.
He said not enough impact.
Right.
The second thing is, it's all very well to talk about such a long period of growth, but the fact is, it's only in the last 7 or 8 years that we've been growing at above 7%. So actually, the conventional measure of what people would call transiting to high growth is sort of growing for 7% at 7% for 15 years. We haven't done that yet.
Well, the growth is fine. I don't think they're arguing. But is it a terrible failure that you haven't attacked poverty and malnutrition and healthcare?
Yeah. Well, let's separate these things out. First of all, as Amartya himself said, poverty is going down. I do think that on the malnutrition front, it is shameful because the numbers are too high. And to some extent, it's not because government hasn't been using certain instruments. They have. But I don't think that we've been doing quite what is necessary to bring about the improvement in child malnutrition. Now, I mean, these are areas where growth itself doesn't automatically lead to an improvement. I mean, it depends on sort of age of marriage, education of the girl, knowledge of feeding habits, immunization of children, those sort of health-related things. And I think frankly,
have we failed on that? Why have we failed?
Well, we've been late in coming to a recognition that that is important. And certainly in the last few years, that has been put central into the government's agenda.
Is that all it is, Professor Sen, just a late recognition of the problem?
Well, I think that's certainly part of the problem, but I think there is a bigger story, and I know that you want me to quarrel with one thing.
No,
and that's...
They want you to quarrel with
it doesn't serve that cause terribly well. Namely, that it's not just a question of the government. It's also the question of how the society views these problems. I mean, if you open the Indian newspapers, the picture that comes through is that of a jolly lot of human beings leading a great life, watching great movies, at least exciting movies, and in general not very much about what's happening to a huge proportion of the population. And I think the nature of the problem becomes clear. For example, recently the government presented a food security bill.
Right.
Now, that certainly makes demand on fiscal side.
On the budget.
On the budget.
Yeah.
But compared with many other things, including subsidies on fuels and fertilizers, including having no taxes on diamond gold import, even after taking note of the fact that many of them may be exported, if you look at the net amount, the additional amount in the food security bill was relatively small. But the chorus in the newspaper that this is utterly irresponsible.
The NDTV news app had redefined the entire genre. Now another market beater. It's already hit #1.
NDTV Profit, India's #1 finance app. Download free at ndtvprofit.com/apps. Live stream of NDTV Profit, market news, and your easy-to-manage portfolio. Download now, ndtvprofit.com/apps.